Hi, my name's Henry. 2 weeks ago, my brother looked me in the eye and said, "The bank took your beach house." What he didn't know was that I'd just paid off a $5.2 million mortgage early. He wasn't trying to warn me. He was trying to steal it. He pressured our aging parents into draining their retirement to buy the house cheap, under a lie he built from the ground up. And they believed him. They always believed him. But when the bank called me, the truth shattered everything. What kind of family builds an ambush from your own success? And when the lie collapses, who do you become? When silence is your only weapon. Because this isn't a story about losing a house. It's a story about what they tried to erase and what I chose to remember. Dinner at my parents' place had always followed the same rhythm. You arrived hungry, but not hopeful. You sat where you were told. You listened more than you spoke. And if you were the youngest, you learned early that silence was mistaken for agreement. That evening felt no different when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light was already on, a yellow glow spilling across the concrete. Inside, the television murmured in the background, some news anchor talking about interest rates and housing prices. My mother was setting the table with careful precision. My father sat at the head, scrolling on his phone. Victor, my older brother, leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. I took my usual seat. No one asked how my drive was. No one asked how work was going. That was normal. Victor filled the space easily, talking about his week, his plans, the way he always did. My parents nodded along, asking questions, offering opinions. I watched, listened, and waited. The food was passed around. Forks clinked. Someone mentioned the weather. It was all ordinary, almost comforting in its predictability. But I'd learned that moments like that were dangerous. Calm in our family never meant safety. It meant something was about to land. Victor cleared his throat, smiling as if he were about to share good news. "So," he said, loud enough to cut through the room, "the bank finally took your beach house." The sentence hung there, heavy and unfinished. My mother froze with the serving spoon in her hand. My father looked up slowly, eyes narrowing as if he were trying to process the words. No one looked at me right away. That, too, was familiar. In this family, conclusions came before questions. I didn't react. I didn't rush to correct him. I felt the moment register in my body, not as panic, but as a sharp internal click, like a lock turning. Victor kept going, encouraged by the silence. I mean, it was only a matter of time, right? That mortgage was massive. Anyone could see this coming. My mother finally set the spoon down. "Oh," she said quietly. "Henry." No one asked if it was true. No one asked how I was holding up. Victor leaned forward, elbows on the table, already reshaping the story. "It's not all bad. Honestly, this could work out for all of us. These foreclosures, they're opportunities if you know how to move." I watched my father's expression change. Numbers started forming behind his eyes. My mother pressed her lips together, thinking. The room shifted. What had been my supposed loss was already turning into a group discussion. Victor spoke with confidence, tossing around figures, timing, leverage. He talked about auctions, about how properties like mine could be picked up for a fraction of their value. He spoke as if he'd been waiting for this. That's when the cold realization settled in. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't confusion. The lie had arrived fully formed, and it was already being monetized. "I could handle the process," Victor said. "Make sure it stays in the family. No outsiders. It's actually smart if you think about it." My mother nodded slowly. We should at least hear him out. Hear him out, not me. I sat there, hands resting in my lap, noticing details I might have missed before. Victor knew the supposed status of my loan. He knew timelines. He spoke as if he'd seen paperwork he shouldn't have seen. I filed that away quietly. At one point, my father stood and motioned for me to follow him into the hallway. The noise of the dining room softened behind us. Just keep the peace, son, he said, voice low. This isn't the time to stir things up. I nodded. I always did. Agreement was expected. Resistance was treated like betrayal. But something inside me shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It felt like the slow fracture of something that had already been worn thin. When we returned to the table, Victor was still talking. My parents were listening closely now. Plans were forming. Money hadn't moved yet, but I could feel it preparing to. I said nothing. I watched everything. I nodded like I always did, but this time I didn't feel small. I felt warned. As I stepped back into the evening air, the ocean breeze felt sharper than usual. I didn't drive straight home. I needed to move, to think, so I walked a few blocks along the quiet street. By the time I got back to my place, the night had settled in heavy and silent. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, sunlight slipped in through the blinds like it always did, cutting across the hardwood floor. My phone buzzed before I even poured my coffee. Mom, I answered, expecting concern. What I got instead was logistics. Henry, she said, skipping any greeting, do you know if the foreclosure papers were official? I mean, did the bank give you a final date? I paused. What? She continued like I hadn't spoken. Victor said sometimes there are penalties if the place isn't cleared out in time. We just want to make sure you're not on the hook for anything extra. There was no trace of warmth in her tone. It was worry, yes, but not for me. For the money. For the mess they assumed I'd created. I started, but she cut me off. Can you just send us whatever notices you got? Victor thinks we should start making calls today. Fear travels fast in families like mine. Faster than facts. Faster than care. A few minutes later, Victor's voice joined the conversation. On speaker. I heard him loud and clear from their end of the room, smooth as ever. Foreclosures don't wait, he said. You've got vultures circling the second the sign goes up. If we want to keep this in the family, we have to act now. I stayed quiet, letting the weight of his urgency sink in. Now, I'm not saying we buy it right away, he continued, his voice all reason and calm. But we could front a small amount just to secure it. Then later, Henry can figure out how to repay it. Front a small amount. Like this was a poker game. Like he was doing me a favor. Then came the real kicker. I was talking to that guy over at First Union, Victor said. He said you could technically use retirement savings temporarily, as long as it's documented right. Mom, Dad, you'd just be helping stabilize a family asset. That's all this is. A pause. A calculated one. I could hear my mother hesitate. That doesn't sound like something we should rush into. But that's just it, Victor pressed. We have to. You wait too long, and some out-of-towner picks it up for half its value. We'd be watching someone else sipping iced tea on our porch by summer. Our porch, I thought, like it had already slipped out of my hands and into his. My father's voice entered the mix, low but firm. How much are we talking? That was the shift. I could feel it. Victor smelled the opening and went in. 50 to 70, just to hold it. We'd write it up properly. I've done this before. Trust me, I'm not gonna let this house go to strangers. Fear, urgency, and a sprinkle of family loyalty. He had them right where he wanted. I couldn't stay silent. I leaned closer to my phone and asked, "Where exactly did you hear it was foreclosed?" There was a beat of silence. Then Victor laughed, not lighthearted, but dismissive. "What are you talking about? The bank took it, Henry. It's not yours to worry about anymore." And just like that, the conversation moved on, without me. Not one of them asked me to clarify. Not one asked if it was true. It wasn't just that they didn't believe me. They didn't even think to ask. In their minds, Victor held the facts. I held the embarrassment. I let the silence stretch, let them talk themselves in circles. Victor kept throwing around dates, contacts, and even a name of someone who could handle the paperwork on our behalf. It sounded rehearsed. I muted my end of the call for a moment and sat back, trying to steady my thoughts. The plan wasn't spontaneous. He had details. Too many. This wasn't reaction. It was orchestration. They weren't just taking the story from me. They were taking the authority too. And I had let them for years, thinking silence was the higher ground. I returned to the call just in time to hear my father say, "We should meet with Victor this afternoon. Go over the options." And still no one had asked me what I knew or what I wanted. I said nothing. I listened. Victor kept talking, but I was listening to something else now. The way he said "we," the way he moved pieces like a man who already owned the board. I wasn't panicking, not anymore. That was when I understood this wasn't panic talking, it was preparation. After the call ended, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay inside, boxed in by four walls while that conversation played on loop in my head. The roads were quiet as I drove down the coast, the late morning sun crawling higher, casting sharp shadows across the dashboard. I rolled down the window, let the wind rush in, hoping it would blow something loose. Instead, it brought back a memory I hadn't touched in years. The sound of the waves always did that. Took me back to another morning, one not unlike this one, when I learned that silence could be just as damning as any lie. It was about 8 years ago. I'd just moved back to California after a job in Portland fell through. I was staying in the guest room while figuring things out. Victor, as always, was already knee-deep in his next plan. This one involved Dad co-signing a loan for a real estate flip he couldn't lose on. Everyone acted like it was already a success, like his wins were inevitable. I remember walking into the living room and hearing Victor laying it out to our parents. Smooth, polished, confident. He needed a signature, just a signature. It would be temporary, just on paper. "No risk to you," he said, smiling like he was offering them a vacation. Dad was hesitant. Mom was quiet. I stood there, listening from the doorway. Victor turned to me. "Back me up here, Henry. You've done finance stuff. You know this is solid, right?" I didn't. I hadn't even seen the paperwork. But the room had already picked a side, and anything I said would be treated like betrayal. So I nodded, said nothing, let it happen. The deal unraveled 6 months later. Contractor issues, permit problems, market shift, every excuse in the book. The house sat unsold for over a year. My parents took the hit. They never said much about it afterward, just tightened their spending, put off a trip they'd been planning for their anniversary. Victor apologized in that way people do when they're not really sorry. It just didn't go the way I thought. You know how real estate is. Then he was on to the next thing. And me? I swallowed it. Told myself it wasn't my fault. But it was. Not because I orchestrated it, but because I stood there, silent, when my voice could have changed the course. I let the fear of disrupting peace cost them security. They called it maturity. Said I was the calm one, the level head, that I didn't make things worse. But no one asked what it cost to keep swallowing warnings. That wasn't the only time. A year later, when Victor borrowed from our uncle's retirement fund with a handshake promise to pay it back in 6 months, he didn't. When Uncle Joe quietly started driving for a rideshare service in his 70s, I put it together. I knew. But saying anything would have reopened wounds, started arguments. So I kept my mouth shut. Each time, I made excuses. It's not my fight. They won't believe me anyway. At least it's not my money. But that was the lie I told myself, so I wouldn't have to admit the truth. I didn't speak up because it was easier to carry guilt than conflict. Now, I was back in the same pattern. Same tone in Victor's voice. Same urgency. Same twisting of loyalty into leverage. Only this time, the cost wasn't just a loan or a delayed vacation. It was my name, my home, my place in this family. As I drove, the road curved alongside the coast. To my left, the Pacific stretched out in calm defiance. Waves rolled in steady rhythms, not rushed, not frantic, just sure. I pulled over at a small turnout and let the engine idle. A couple of surfers were pulling on wetsuits nearby, laughing, completely unaware of the pressure building in someone else's world. I stared at the horizon and thought about how many times I'd told myself to let things go. How many small betrayals I'd watched from the sidelines, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to be the cause of more friction. I'd helped teach them this would work. Not with words, but with silence. Every time I stepped aside, every time I swallowed concern, I paved the way for this moment. And now, they didn't even need me in the room to decide what happened to my life. But something was shifting. I didn't feel the need to blow it all up. I wasn't about to storm into my parents' house with documents and proof and rage. That wasn't my way. Not anymore. But I wasn't going to disappear either. Victor thought I'd do what I always did. Let the wave pass and figure out how to clean up after. But he wasn't watching closely enough. The difference this time wasn't that I was angry. It was that I was awake. I didn't need proof yet, but I knew I was done being the quiet solution. The engine was still running, a low hum in the background as I sat there, staring at the water but not really seeing it. My phone was in my hand, thumb hovering for a moment before I finally opened the banking app. I didn't know what I expected. Some error message, a frozen account, maybe even a notice of foreclosure blinking at me in red. But that's not what I saw. The screen loaded cleanly. All the accounts listed. All the numbers exactly where they should have been. I scrolled to the mortgage account for the beach house. Balance 0.00. Next payment due. Payoff date last Thursday. Confirmed. Processed. No alerts. No flags. No trace of foreclosure. I blinked, stared harder. Checked again. It was done. Not just current. Done. That house was mine. Not pending. Not defaulted. Not in process. Paid off. In full. A strange calm moved through me. Not relief exactly. It wasn't time for that. But something quiet inside me steadied. I hadn't lost control. I hadn't forgotten something. Or missed a payment. The silence they had filled with speculation and whispers. It hadn't come from ignorance. It had come from choice. They had just mistaken the kind of silence it was. I sat with that truth for a while, watched the waves crash and recede, Let the sun hit my arms. Took one long breath before I started the car again. Back on the road, I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Victor or our parents. Didn't send a screenshot or forward the mortgage confirmation. Instead, I opened my notes app and started writing. Numbers, dates, the transaction ID from the payoff. Screenshots followed. I labeled them clearly. Beach house, full payoff, verified. Back home, I walked straight to my desk. The house was quiet, still late morning, not yet noon. I sat down, opened a new folder on my computer, and gave it a name that didn't need frills. 1409 Ocean View, Records. I imported everything, organized it by date. Then I opened a blank document and titled it Timeline of Discrepancies. That's when the messages started coming in. First, a text from Mom. Victor says we should have everything ready by Tuesday. Are you okay if we give him the account to wire the funds? No mention of me owning the house, no question about the foreclosure. Just a quiet assumption that the facts had shifted in Victor's direction, and that I would comply. Next came Victor's voice, sharp and confident, in a family group message. I spoke to the broker. If we move by tomorrow, we can still get the reduced rate on the buyback. After that, it gets messy. No greeting, no. What do you think, Henry? Just logistics, planning, marching forward like the outcome was already settled. It struck me how no one asked the simplest question. Was the house actually foreclosed? They didn't ask because they didn't need to. Victor had handed them a version of events that made him the savior, the fixer. And they wanted it to be true. Because it meant less uncertainty, less mess, less confrontation. He'd played it perfectly, and I'd let them believe it. But now, with the truth sitting in a folder under my fingertips, I wasn't going to shout it from the rooftop. Not yet. Silence had served them once because it made me invisible. This time, it would make me dangerous. I replied to Mom with one line. Let me get back to you this afternoon. That was it. Then I opened my calendar, blocked out the next few hours, and added a note. Call mortgage officer. Confirm title release timing. Victor's messages kept rolling in. He was pushing the narrative forward like a man with a deadline. Need to loop in Dad later. Should only take 10 minutes. Title company will send over a draft doc. Just a formality. If you two are serious about helping, it has to happen this week. I read every word slowly. Not once did he ask me if the house was still mine. Because somewhere in that smooth voice of his, Victor had already removed me from the equation, and that, I realized, was his biggest mistake. By the time they were ready to move money, I already knew something they didn't. I was still seated at the dining table, laptop open, papers neatly arranged beside my coffee mug, most untouched. A steady breeze drifted through the open patio door, carrying in the distant sound of waves, gulls, and wind-blown branches. It was early afternoon, but the light had already softened in that California way. Warm, but not inviting. The phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Area code local. I stared at it for a beat too long, almost letting it go to voicemail. Then something in me, instinct maybe, told me to answer. Hello? I kept my voice neutral. Yes, hello. May I speak with Mr. Henry Ashcroft? This is Henry. Mr. Ashcroft, my name is Marissa Calderon. I'm calling from the escrow department at Coastal State Bank regarding your property at 1409 Ocean View Drive. Is now a good time? I stood up without thinking, walking slowly toward the window. Yes, what's this about? I'm just following up on the payoff confirmation submitted last week. We finalized the release of lien and recorded the closure with the county as of yesterday. You should be receiving your original documents by mail within 5 to 7 business days. Silence on my end. Marissa continued, voice smooth, practiced. Just to confirm, mortgage account ending in 4380, closed in full. Final payment received electronically on the 18th. Payoff amount of $388,262.14 processed successfully. No further balance. I blinked, trying to ground myself. So, just to be clear, there is no foreclosure proceeding, no default, no pending action? No, sir, she said without hesitation. Your account is in excellent standing. It's been fully closed. Congratulations. She sounded almost cheerful, like this was a good thing. Like I should be smiling, but I wasn't. Not even close. I thanked her, wrote down the reference number she offered, and ended the call. Then I just stood there, holding the phone in one hand, staring out at the ocean like it might suddenly hand me a new explanation. There it was. Verifiable, external, objective truth. The house wasn't in danger. It never had been. So how the hell had my entire family come to believe it was? That kind of lie didn't come from a misunderstanding. It came from repetition, timing, confidence. Victor had built it like scaffolding, piece by piece, until everyone saw the same structure. And now they were ready to act on it. Move money, draw up contracts, talk buybacks and discounts like they were doing me a favor. And I'd been sitting in the very house they were preparing to rescue me from. Another ping from my phone. A new message from Dad. We're going to loop in a lawyer to look at Victor's plan. It's generous of him to put himself on the line like this. Let's talk after dinner? Generous. That word nearly made me laugh. Instead, I let the phone drop onto the table and sank into the chair. It wasn't about the money anymore. It hadn't been, not really. The house was just a stage. The real play was trust. And I was realizing, probably too late, that mine had been slipping out from under me long before the beach house ever came into the picture. I thought back to that moment at dinner, Victor's voice announcing the foreclosure like a news anchor breaking headlines. No one had turned to me. No one had asked, "Is that true?" They had just accepted it, absorbed it, because maybe deep down, they had already decided I was the one who lost things. Not Victor. Never Victor. And it stung. Not the lie itself, but how easily they'd let it settle in as truth. That's what broke something in me. Not the facts. The speed with which they moved on without needing to check with me at all. Another memory surfaced, my father's voice from the night before, low and exhausted. Just keep the peace, son. Keep the peace, even if that meant letting someone else rewrite reality. Not this time. Still, I didn't pick up the phone, didn't call my parents to confront them, didn't reply to Victor's latest message about getting the paperwork lined up by tomorrow. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch between us, not empty, but full of purpose now. I saved Marissa's number. I emailed myself the recording of the call, backed it up to 2 folders, and filed the confirmation under Legal House just in case. And then I opened a blank note and titled it, What They Knew, When. I wasn't ready to drop the truth like a bomb yet, not because I was scared, but because I finally understood something Victor had always known. Timing wins more wars than honesty ever did. So I waited, measured, watched. I was standing in a house that was fully mine, listening to people plan its sale without me. I stayed where I was for a moment, letting the weight of that realization settle. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to calm me. Now it sharpened my focus. I closed the patio door, carried my coffee into the office, and sat down at the desk that faced the water. The screen woke with a soft glow, and I dialed the bank again. This time, I asked for the legal department. After a brief hold, a man came on the line. Measured voice, careful phrasing. The kind of person who chose words the way surgeons chose tools. I confirmed my identity, repeated the address, gave him the reference number Marissa had provided earlier. He pulled the file up quickly. "Yes, Mr. Ashcroft," he said. "Your mortgage is fully settled. Title release is in progress. There's nothing outstanding." "I need to ask you something," I said. "If someone tried to move money or initiate a transaction tied to this property without my authorization, what would happen?" There was a pause. Not concern. Procedure. "We'd flag it immediately," he replied. "Any attempt to act on an account without standing would trigger a review. We can place a temporary hold while we investigate." "Do that," I said. "If anything comes through." Another pause, shorter this time. "Understood." When the call ended, I leaned back and watched the ocean for a few seconds. The horizon was steady, unmoved. I liked that. The first message came 20 minutes later, from my mother. "Henry, are you having trouble logging into the retirement account? The transfer isn't going through." I didn't respond. Then my father called. I let it ring. Then Victor. 3 missed calls in under 5 minutes. I didn't need to check the app to know what had happened. The bank had done exactly what it was supposed to do. The plan they'd built on borrowed certainty had hit a wall. I opened the family group chat and read back through the messages. Victor's language had shifted, less confident now. Shorter sentences, punctuation creeping in. "This shouldn't be happening." I'll call them again. Something's off. I saved every message, screen recorded the thread, dropped it into the folder with the rest. Then I started building something else. I pulled up old files I hadn't looked at in years. Contracts I'd signed quietly. Payments that had come in without fanfare. Emails congratulating me on work my family barely acknowledged. Awards I never brought home because it felt awkward to explain them at dinner. I wasn't collecting trophies. I was assembling a ledger. A record of what I had built without their applause, what I had protected while they were busy, assuming I'd failed. Outside the office window, the afternoon light shifted. The sun slid lower, bright but less forgiving. Time was moving, whether they liked it or not. Victor's name lit up my phone again. I let it go to voicemail. Then another message hit the group chat. This one from him. "Henry, we need to talk, right now." No greeting, no courtesy, just urgency. I felt a flicker of satisfaction I didn't fully trust. Not joy. Something colder. Controlled. I thought about confronting him immediately, about laying everything out and watching the story collapse in real time. But I knew better. I'd learned this pattern too well. People like Victor didn't confess when cornered. They lashed out, redirected, played victim. I wasn't ready to give him that stage. So I sent one message. Just one. "Everything is current. Proceed carefully." That was it. No explanation, no attachments, no emotion. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then came back. My phone buzzed with a string of messages I didn't open. I didn't need to, because for the first time, the silence wasn't protecting them. It was boxing them in. I shut the laptop, stood up, and stepped out onto the deck. The air was cooler now, the ocean darker. Somewhere down the coast, lights were beginning to come on, one by one. Victor could be angry. My parents could be confused. None of that changed the math. They had tried to move money that wasn't theirs to move. And now they knew I was watching. Victor typed back furiously, but I didn't read it, because now it wasn't about their anger. I stepped away from the phone without looking at Victor's latest tirade. My pulse wasn't racing, no anger clouding my thoughts. I moved through the kitchen deliberately, poured a glass of water, and carried it back to the office. The sun was beginning its slow descent, slanting gold across the hardwood floors. I just sat back down when my phone rang. Unknown number, area code matched the county courthouse. I answered before the second ring. Mr. Ashcroft. The voice was clipped, professional. Female. This is Dana Lyons with the County Records Department. I've just completed a verification request submitted by your legal counsel regarding Parcel 227B. I didn't speak, just waited. There's a record of attempted foreclosure documentation filed 3 weeks ago. However, it was flagged almost immediately due to inconsistencies in the notarization. I leaned forward. Inconsistencies? Yes, sir. The notary listed has not been registered in this state for over 2 years, and the signature style does not match records we have on file. And the filer? I asked. There was a pause. I heard her click through something on her end. Filed electronically from an IP address associated with Victor Ashcroft. That's now under internal review for potential fraud. I closed my eyes. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was confirmation. The kind that arrived quietly, like a final puzzle piece sliding into place. Thank you, I said. That matches what we were expecting. We'll notify your attorney formally, she added. But I thought you should know. The line went dead. I sat in stillness for several seconds. Then I pulled open the group chat. Dozens of unread messages. Victor had been busy, accusing, deflecting, demanding explanations he had no right to ask for. My parents hadn't said much, just a few neutral lines asking us to talk calmly and keep this civil. That's what they always said after the damage was done. I opened a separate message thread with my lawyer and began forwarding screenshots. I sent over Victor's bluffing messages, the timestamps of the frozen transactions, even his demands that I step aside so they could finalize the beach house paperwork. My attorney's reply came back fast. This is solid. They can't spin out of this. Want me to send formal notification tonight? I typed, yes, copy me on everything. The moment hung there, silent but seismic. Years of being left out, overlooked, written off, all of it coiled beneath this one moment. I took a breath and turned to a folder on my desktop. Family, legal, house. Inside I had files, timelines, payment records, mortgage payoff confirmations, even old voicemails of Victor's, back when he still masked manipulation in sweet tones. I added the screenshots to the folder, dated them, cross-referenced with the transaction logs. Somewhere my brother was pacing. I could feel it. His confidence had always been loud. But now it would be clattering around the walls of whatever room he was in, echoing with uncertainty. My phone buzzed again, this time a call. Victor. I let it ring. Then again. Same number. I answered on the third ring, switched to speaker, and hit record. You think this is funny? Victor barked, his voice already fraying at the edges. No, I said evenly. I think it's necessary. They're talking about fraud now, Henry. Real consequences. Do you have any idea what this could mean for all of us? For you, maybe, I said. I didn't forge documents. I didn't try to transfer funds without authorization. He was silent for a second too long. Then, I did what I had to do. You were dragging your feet. No, I cut in. You were hoping I wouldn't look, that I'd stay quiet, like always. You're blowing this up, he snapped. It's a family matter. We can fix this without dragging in lawyers. You already did, I said. Another pause, shorter this time. I heard it land, the difference between denial and realization. I never meant, he began. Doesn't matter now, I interrupted. The paper trail speaks louder than either of us. There was a long breath on the other end, then nothing. For a moment, I thought he'd hung up, but he hadn't. He was just quiet, for once. You think this makes you the hero? He finally muttered. You think you're some kind of martyr? I think, I said slowly, I'm finally not the fool. I ended the call. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the waves. A few sailboats drifted far off the shore, white against the deepening blue. The air had cooled. Shadows stretched across the sand. This wasn't vindication in the way I'd imagined it years ago. It didn't feel loud or sweet. It felt like air after a storm, heavier but clean. I'd spent years keeping the peace, letting others define my silence. But now that same silence had become something else. A strategy, a shield. Victor's voice hadn't just cracked on the call, it had collapsed. And my parents? Their silence in the group chat was its own admission. I messaged my attorney again. Go ahead, notify everyone officially. Don't wait until morning. She confirmed with a short, done. I closed my laptop, took my glass of water to the sink, and rinsed it out. Then I walked through the living room, pausing to switch off the lights one by one. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. Shoulders straighter than I remembered, eyes a little clearer. Victor's silence on the call told me everything. They finally understood the rules had changed. And the fallout began almost instantly. Barely 10 minutes after I hung up, the family group chat lit up like a wildfire. First it was Mom, always the first to try and patch things together with soft words and vague pleas. Let's not escalate this, Henry. We're still family. Then came Victor, predictably frantic. You think this makes you look smart? You've just made enemies out of your own blood. Dad added nothing, which said plenty. His silence had always been the easiest seat in the house. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The threads of their panic were starting to unravel without my help. Message after message rolled in. Some defensive, some accusatory, some just confused. They asked if I'd misunderstood. Claimed they were trying to protect the property. Said it had all been a miscommunication, blown out of proportion. But I wasn't watching to argue. I was watching to observe. Each message told me more about them than they realized. Just as the sun dipped low enough to cast the office in soft amber, my attorney called again. They've confirmed it, she said. The funds from the attempted transaction, about $400,000 total, are frozen indefinitely pending the investigation. I leaned back in my chair, watching the waves crest far below. And Victor? Facing possible fraud charges. Your parents are named as attempted co-signers but didn't authorize the transfer formally. That may shield them. Barely. I stayed quiet. They're scared now, she added, and they should be. I thanked her and ended the call. By the time I returned to the group chat, the messages had slowed. They knew the ground had shifted. Their plans had collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. Then came the real blow. Around 8:30 that evening, a news alert flashed across my screen. A small but well-read local news outlet had picked up the story from the court's public filings. Attempted property fraud under review. Prominent local banker tied to forgery. The article didn't name me, but it didn't need to. Victor's name was in bold print, his position at the bank, the investigation into forged foreclosure documents, the failed transfer of property from a living relative. My phone buzzed repeatedly, not from the family, but from old friends, colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years. Is this real? Is that your brother? Henry, what the hell happened? I ignored most of it. Some things didn't need to be clarified. A little after 9, the group chat flared back to life. Victor had seen the article. He went from fury to disbelief in 4 messages. This is public? You did this, didn't you? You think this is funny? I can't go back to work now. You've ruined everything. I swear, I will fix this. Just stop this madness. And then, silence again. My attorney messaged me minutes later. Victor's employer confirmed suspension, likely permanent. He'd been with that bank for 8 years, angled for VP roles, spoke often about climbing the ladder. Now, with a fraud investigation tied to his name, that ladder was gone. I thought I'd feel more triumphant, maybe, but all I felt was a quiet kind of peace, like watching a tide pull away what was never solid to begin with. Instead of celebrating, I opened the folder on my computer labeled Ghost Ledger. I added the screenshots from the group chat, time-stamped and annotated. I wasn't collecting these for revenge. I was collecting them because patterns matter. Because sometimes the only way to make peace with history is to see it clearly. The house was quiet. Outside, the ocean breathed steadily, indifferent and eternal. Later, I stepped out onto the deck with a fresh cup of coffee. The night air cool, but not cold. My laptop was still open inside, casting a soft blue light across the wood floors. I watched the moon rise slow over the water. An email came in around 10:15. Subject line, "Congratulations. 26 Research Fellowship awarded." It was from the institute that had reviewed my latest submission on adaptive architecture in coastal environments. The same submission where I'd cited the beach house as both personal residence and design case study. They'd awarded me the fellowship, and in the attached letter, they noted how ownership and maintenance of historic property under contested personal conditions added valuable real-world context. I smiled. Not because of the money, it wasn't about that, but because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I hadn't compromised. I hadn't backed down or stepped aside. I'd met the storm head on, and I'd remained still at the center. My phone sat beside me. Still. Silent. No calls from my parents. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I could have called them. Could have reached out, demanded apologies, asked for reasons I already knew. But I didn't. Sometimes silence wasn't surrender. Sometimes silence was sovereignty. I took another sip of coffee, the ceramic warm in my hands. Sitting on my deck, coffee in hand, I realized for the first time I was finally in control. I finished the last sip, let the mug rest on the table beside me, and stayed still as the wind moved softly around the deck. That night felt different. Not triumphant, quieter than that, like something had closed without slamming. 2 weeks passed, the chaos settled, not because it was resolved, but because silence grew where noise had failed. One morning, just after sorting through mail that mostly held catalogs and polite rejections for things I'd long stopped applying for, I found an email from my father. It was short, just 5 lines. "Henry, your mother and I have been thinking a lot about what's happened. Maybe we didn't see things clearly. Maybe you've been carrying more than you should have. We hope, when the time is right, we can talk." There was no apology, Just a well-dressed attempt at reflection. I didn't write back, not out of anger. I just wasn't ready to interpret it. I'd seen that pattern before. Messages sent not to heal, but to quiet guilt. I set the laptop aside and walked to the bookshelf in the corner of my office. Behind a row of architectural journals, I kept the ghost ledger. It wasn't a real book, just a binder filled with printed emails, certificates, photos, things I'd collected over the years. Some of them were ridiculous in hindsight. The third-place science fair ribbon from high school, a blurry picture of me speaking at a city hall design forum, thank you notes from clients whose names I barely remembered. 52 entries, each one a small reminder that I'd done more than they ever noticed. There was a photo tucked near the back I hadn't seen in years. Me at 28, just after finishing grad school. Smiling, holding blueprints rolled under one arm, standing in front of a model I'd built by hand. Behind me stood my brother and my parents. None of them were smiling. My name had been called out that day in front of hundreds, and still, they hadn't clapped. I stared at that photo a while. Then, I carefully slid it back in place. I didn't need their validation anymore. But I'd be lying if I said I never wanted it. Late that afternoon, I got a call from Trevor, my cousin's son. I hadn't heard from him in years. Not since a Thanksgiving dinner where he asked me about architecture and I handed him a book instead of brushing him off like the others did. "Uncle Henry," he said, "I just wanted to say, I saw everything. What happened with Victor? I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to tell you. I get it now. Why you were always quiet at family stuff. Why you didn't push." I didn't speak at first. His voice cracked slightly, like he wasn't used to saying what he meant. "You made it out," he added. "You did it without them." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thanks, Trev. That means something." That call stayed with me long after we hung up. That night, I found myself reaching for the old ceramic mug again, the one Mom gave me when I moved into my first apartment. "For your new beginnings," it read, in fading script. I hadn't used it in years, mostly because I associated it with the kind of hope that always went unacknowledged. But that night, it felt like it belonged. I sat back down at my desk, the mug warm again in my hands, and looked out toward the sea. Maybe they'd never say the words I used to wish for. Maybe the damage couldn't be reversed, not in the way we imagine healing looks. But I'd built something without them. I'd protected it when it counted. And now, in the quiet that followed the storm, I could finally hear myself think. I checked the group chat one last time. It had been quiet for days. The last message was from my mother, a forwarded link to a sermon about forgiveness. No text, just the link. I stared at it for a long minute, then tapped mute notifications. Not out of malice, but because some boundaries deserve peace. I closed the laptop, stood, and walked to the deck. The breeze had picked up slightly, and the moon was already low on the horizon. A few neighbors had their porch lights on. Familiar silhouettes moved behind curtains. Life continued. It always does. I walked the length of the deck slowly, letting each step ground me. No revenge, no outbursts, no headlines anymore. Just me, this house, and the sound of the tide brushing against the sand far below. The ocean whispered as always, and I finally listened. Not for anyone else, but for myself.